Hi, everyone. We're going to get started here. I'll ask all 5 of you to quiet down. Tonight, we're in the thriving metropolis of Streamstown. We got Paul Hinman here to speak tonight. I'm Dustin Newman, the president for the Vermilion Westminster Wainwright CA, and I'll be the MC for tonight. To lead it off, we're going to have Bob Smith come up and just say a prayer.
Thank you. And shall we just bow for a moment? For God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening and for the efforts that have been made to get our speaker here and the effort that each of us have made to be here. We pray, oh God, that you would help us to see our way in the next year, possibly in the right direction and with the kind of leadership that we are needing. We pray that you would bless our time as we share it together tonight. And may Paul give us the kind of hope that we're looking for and that we're needing, and that this country is needing. And we'll ask these things in Jesus' name for his sake. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Bob. Before Paul comes up and talks tonight, just wanted to talk about the state of our country and where we sit at this moment. We're in a terrible position. We have a government that takes our money and at the same time refuses to support our industries in the West. The recent cancellation of the pipeline Keystone down to the south is just another nail in the coffin. And the government with its policies has made it so that there won't even be pipelines built in the future. There's no will to fight for them. We stand on the precipice of a long period of darkness. And it's not going to be easy to get past it. There's a lot of hard work in front of us. I guess that the Wild Rose and the reason why I joined it is it's the only light in the darkness, the only people that are willing to fight for the people of this province, of this region. And I'm glad tonight that Paul's here to talk to everyone about our future. Thank you. Danny, do you want to come up and introduce?
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking time out of your busy lives to join us. Thank you to Bob Smith for asking the blessing with about 12 seconds notice. And I think we all agree that things started going to hell for us when we stopped saying the Lord's Prayer at the start of school. So we've tried to make a habit of saying a prayer, and I guess time will tell if our prayers are answered. So anyway, thanks for being here. In 1904, Canada's Interior Minister Clifford Sifton said, "We desire, in fact, every patriotic Canadian desires, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our workshops of Eastern Canada, and contribute in every way to the East's prosperity." The Supreme Court's recent decision has assured Eastern Canadians that he and his government are intent on doubling down on Clifford Sifton's dream. This is the second time in many of our lifetimes that a federal government supported by Eastern voters has destroyed a generation of Albertans' accumulated wealth, along with the hopes and dreams of hundreds of thousands of families, businesses, and communities. In both cases, it happened as a result of a direct, calculated, and concerted attack on our energy industries. Despite having our wealth and our economy devastated twice in 2 generations, Albertans have managed to send approximately $630 billion net to Ottawa during the past 30 years. In May of 2019, Jason Kenney came to power, promising to end this injustice with decisive action on equalization, followed by the creation of the Fair Deal Panel, tasked with charting a course to economic recovery for Alberta. However, today, approximately 23 months later, the tough talk on equalization has become a promise of a referendum in the fall of 2021, and the Fair Deal Panel's 6 months of meetings and studies have led to more months of meetings and more studies. So here we are, 115 years into Confederation and 22 or 23 months into a Jason Kenney government, and we are still standing, or perhaps kneeling, on the doorstep of Confederation with our hat in our hands and their eastern hands in our pockets. For many in Alberta, it seems that the only thing that is happening is that more and more folks are closing their businesses. Many are losing their private sector jobs. Many are losing their homes. Many are losing their marriages. Many have lost hope for their future in our province. And sadly, far too many are without hope for life itself and are taking their own lives in despair. I'm reminded of an interview with a passenger on Sully Sullenberg's ill-fated 1549, Flight 1549, which he landed on the Hudson River some years ago, 2009 to be exact. The passenger and several of his friends were flying to Florida for a 40th birthday golf trip. He said that he had done enough flying to know that when the engines go silent and you can still see folks smoking on the roofs of their buildings, you're going to end up dead. His first thought was of his kids and wife who were going to be without a father and a husband, and then of his wife, then of his friends' wives and kids. And as the trip's organizer, he suddenly felt responsible for all of them. And he said, in 2 minutes and 40 seconds of deathly silence, he said he was without hope and never once thought about surviving the crash. Then over the loudspeaker came a voice saying, "This is the captain, brace for impact." He went on to say that the captain had seemed so calm and confident that for the first time in what had seemed like an eternity, he actually had hope. And as we all know, thank God in Sully, they did land safely on the Hudson, and I'll get back to that story in a couple of minutes. The Greek leader Pericles said, "When you look out over this great country that we all love, remember that it was built by men and women who knew their duty and had the courage to do it." Clearly, the fact that you are here in person or watching online is proof positive that you know that you have a civic duty. The question I think we're all striving to answer tonight and at other meetings around the province is, what should we do, and do we have the ability and the courage to do it? Many in our province have grown cynical about politics and feel that all politicians are alike and not worth supporting. The reason they are cynical is because far too often politicians say one thing when they are campaigning or another thing after they're elected, and far too often and far too late, voters realize that they've once again been lied to, and again they are powerless to do anything about it. Our Economic Education Association, which Paul helped found, just hosted a referendum on Alberta's future conference last weekend in Lloydminster, and we came to a number of conclusions. Number one, we are increasingly being governed by leaders that have spent far more time studying how to get elected than studying how to govern. The government's response to the Fair Deal Panel report and the upcoming referendum on equalization is more about getting re-elected than about getting a new deal for Alberta, either in Canada or otherwise. Voters are tired and frustrated by being lied to by politicians, and they are yearning to be involved in intelligent, respectful, honest discussion about our future. Voters want to be told the truth, and they deserve to be. Particularly here in Alberta, if we want our future to be as bright and prosperous as our past, we will have to make it happen ourselves. I saw a recent thing on Facebook about America, and it said, "America, no one's coming to help us. We have to save ourselves." Well, quite frankly, it's the same thing here in Alberta. Nobody's coming to help us. If we're not going to, it's up to us. We'll have to save ourselves. I said, our old cattleman friend, he said, the cowards stayed in the East. No disrespect to the people in the East, but he said, the cowards stayed in the East and the weak died on the way out. And he said, the West was built by people that just bloody well figured out how to make it happen, no matter how tough the odds were. And certainly, as Dustin, as you pointed out, the odds are about as bad as they've been in most of our lifetimes. So this is going to take a monumental effort from all of us and more. If we want our children and our grandchildren to have nearly as good a life as we've had each one of us is going to have to make making it happen a line item in both our personal financial budget and our personal time budget, and we'll have to ask our friends and our neighbors to do the same. And from experience, I can tell you that many of them, when you ask them for help, they will tell you that they're not interested in politics. And when someone tells me that they're not interested in politics, which many do, I always tell them, my grandfather was not interested in war either. He went twice, so we could have a better life, and we have had. This current struggle is our generation's war, and it's up to us to win it. That brings me back to my Sully story. In the months following his successful landing on the Hudson, he received many honors for saving a plane full of people from almost certain death, and at one point he was asked if he considered himself a hero. His answer was an emphatic no. He said, what I did that day was what I had spent my life thinking about, studying, and preparing to do. And when the time came, I was able to do it successfully. And that brings me to Paul Himon, our guest speaker here tonight, and the interim leader of our Wild Rose party. Paul's grandfather was the provincial treasurer for Ernest Manning, and Paul was 14 years old when his grandfather gave him his first copy of Bastiat's The Law. Paul has spent his life studying, thinking, and preparing himself to deal with the economic and political challenges that are facing Alberta and Canada. He has won several elections by telling the truth in a calm and confident manner, and I'm proud to say that I believe he is well suited and well prepared to lead the Wild Rose Independence Party and Alberta into the future. And I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming him to Streamstown. Here we are. Vermilion Wade Backyard. Thank you, Paul.
Well, thank you, Danny, and thank you, Dustin. And I guess I better get the mic.
Yes.
And if there's a mic out there, thank you too. Very useful. Well, I'm excited to be here, and it's kind of a little bit anomaly. I really appreciate the feedback that I get from the members, their enthusiasm amidst the dreariness. And Dustin's one of the ones that says, Paul, you got to be more cheerful and hopeful with the message that you're going. And I had to watch him tonight, and it's obvious that he has read and gone over the Supreme Court's decision making and realized that they've got another chokehold. It's not one person, it's not two. Like we've got 9 provinces and a couple of territories that putting their hands around our neck, and they want to choke us. They're tired and they're done with Alberta and our livelihood, our industry, the way we make a living. And to me, I'm sorry, but they're a bunch of hypocrites. We talk about how important it is to buy local, and that's our civic duty, and we should be doing that. But yet they use thousands and thousands of barrels of oil and gas and aviation fuel, and they want to buy it from rogue nations. And so tonight I want to talk a little bit about that, because that's the newest and latest chokehold they've got on us. But I want to back up for a minute and ask a question I hope nobody can answer, but that have been there. But has anybody heard of or been to the Gargantua Caves in the Crow's Nest Pass in southern Alberta? Hey, I'm the only one. Good. How many of you have ever gone caving? Okay. The Gargantua Cave is huge, and it's called that because of the miles and miles of tunnels that are in there. But when you go in, you literally go in and you go into the first cave and you think, wow, this is pretty neat, and might be a room not quite this big, and you start going through and you realize in very short order that if you shut your lights out, you can't see anything. But you go in, and I don't think you go in 100 yards, and you get to what we call the first drop. And there's 5 drops in the Gargantua Caves. The first one's about 60 feet. And if you don't know your way around or you're not confident, you leave the rope in the anchor there so somebody can climb back out and help you get out. But it's kind of a situation that once you start, there's no going back. If you pulled your first rope, you just can't get up. But anyways, I took a group of scouts up there a few years back, and we went down the first drop. And I guess I should back up because, I've always been a risk taker, and I don't know, that's been my adrenaline, is doing those type of things. But the boys were there, and normally when you go up, and you start in Alberta, when you come out, you're in BC. But normally when you go up, you always want to go down to the exit because it's kind of a little bit around the corner, And if there's any snow, it can be froze over and you can't get out without a lot of work and hard. But we were all exhausted. It was a hot day. It was June, and thought, oh, the snow's got to be melted. We looked down, over there, and we could see, well, there is a snow drift. But anyways, we had some knives, hatches, and whatnot with us. And we thought, well, worst comes to worst, we'll dig our way out. Nobody wanted to go down and hike that half a kilometer and then back up to look at it. So in we go. And we got into the first area, and I think we had about 11 boys with us. And we said, okay, it's time for an experience to know what darkness is really about. We shut out all the lights, and then you put your hand up, and you can't see it. And it's funny how you really kind of think, how close am I to my nose? We don't visualize it. You can touch your eye, your ears, but we're pretty good. But when you're in complete darkness, and that goes out, and all of a sudden your legs get a little bit nervous and everything else, you have no sense of balance. But that to me was just, I've never experienced such black darkness. You can't see anything until you literally hit your nose, and then you still can't see it because there is just zero light. But what I'm trying to say is that as dark and as gloomy as that is, as we went through those 5 drops, you're in there a long time, and the last 30 feet, you kind of go through what they call the birth canal. And you talk to kids first, are you claustrophobic? Are you going to have a problem? Because like when you're down there and you have that, I mean, there's no help. You got to get over it, and you got to get through it. And us big fat leaders says, no, I can squeeze through there. I don't know I can now. I was a little bit trimmer back then, but it's a tight fit. But if you got the right attitude, you got leaders that are there that are confident, and we brought all those boys through. It was exhilarating. It's a lot of fun. I can't say that what's happening to us, Dustin, is exhilarating, that it's a lot of fun. But boy, I certainly do see the light, that we've made it, that I have confidence because I've been through there before, that other countries and historically other people have been through tougher times than what we have in front of us, in my opinion. And my uncles that were in World War I and World War II, and talking to them, and the number of people that gave their lives and the struggle so that we could have the freedoms that we have today, I just don't think that what we're facing compares to anything like that. And so we've just got to get the courage and say that we're going to do it. We realize that, Ottawa, Easterners, and much of the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, they're against us. And the first and most important thing is we got to realize that and accept that all of these groups are against us. And so are we just going to roll over and say there's nothing we can do and let them choke us, take away our livelihood, and say that, you need to be part of this great reset because nobody deserves to own anything or to be prosperous or to be free? You guys are nothing but just rodents on the earth, and you're destructive. And that's basically the message that many of these elitists speak of, and people like Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum and stuff. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't have any use for those people or their theories or their goals, and we need to start saying no more. And it starts here in Alberta with people like you, that you're here because you all realize that this is a problem, and for us to sit back and do nothing, we lose. And it's interesting, I was reading today, and Danny has a copy of what you call the Founder's Bible, and I was reading in there, and they have some quotes, but one of the quotes they had of President Reagan when he was speaking is that he talked about freedom and how fragile it is. But the scariest part is, he says, in history, there's never been a group of people that have lost their freedom that have regained it back in their lifetime. It usually takes 2 or 3 generations. We've been blessed. We've had it for several generations. And the question is, are we going to be asleep at the wheel and our children won't have those freedoms? Or is it time that we stand up and say, no, we're fighting for those freedoms, and we're not going to lose this fight because we're going to carry on to the end? And that's where I am. And that's why when they asked me to do this with the Wild Rose Independence Party, my first 3 answers were no, not interested, don't want to do it. And the more I'm getting into this, the more critical I realize that, wow, we can't say no as individuals. We have to stand up. We've got to talk to our neighbors. We've got to talk to family. We've got to talk to the people in our community, because it's slipping away, and it's slipping away at a phenomenal rate. Have any of you read any of the articles out on the judgment that the Supreme Court came down yesterday and said that They can have a carbon tax, and basically they can, not too many, okay? There's some interesting articles out there, and they're very enlightening. I'm going to go over a few of them, but I think the first thing to talk about is our Constitution and what's the validity of it. And normally I always carry it with me, but I don't have it tonight. That's okay. We don't need to open up and read it. But the Canadian Constitution, in my opinion, is very flawed. And democracy, if you go back and you talk in history, you know, they always say that democracy is doomed to fail. And the reason why is because eventually the largesse of the government, or the size of the government, and the spending and the taxation of the government will destroy the economy, and it will fail. And, you know, whether it's Greece, the Romans, it's always failed historically. And again, it goes back to the problem of what the government does to the people. And again, we ask that question: Are we here to be servants to the government, or is the government here to serve us? And I remember so many times our premier promising that, oh, he was here to serve us. But boy, I think that he is actually the prison guard and telling us what we can and can't do, far more than saying that, oh yeah, I'll help you get through this, or we'll do that. There's nothing optimistic or positive or giving us any confidence in what they're doing to us with COVID. And maybe I should break it up here for a little bit of a joke. I'm terrible with jokes, but how many of you have heard what the one rat in the House of Commons said to the other rat in the House of Commons? You asked them, hey, have you taken that new vaccine yet? Any idea what the other rat said? Are you kidding? They haven't finished testing it on humans yet. We're in a test. And the question is, are we going to come through that test, or are we just going to get smothered and stuck in that darkness? And to me, I say no. And that fight starts back in rural communities like this. The city seem quite intent at this point and thinking that things are okay. And it's interesting when you take the polls, the cities are far more inclined and saying, oh, these lockdowns are good. I think back in November, I put out a tweet. And I said, every one of these decision makers who say that a business has to shut down, or that a church or a facility can only operate at 15% of its capacity, shouldn't, to me, get any more than 15% of their regular wage. And I prefer, if they want to shut us down, no problem, but your wage goes off. And until you decide we can open that cup again, your wage stays off. I honestly don't think that it would have lasted a month if every one of those decision makers were shut down, like if you owned a hair salon or a gym, or if you had a church and you were the pastor, that their decision would have been very different. And that always bothers me, is that when somebody supposedly in a position of authority tells someone else that under them on what they can and can't do. And to me, I mean, there's no question, the most precious thing that we have and are given is the gift of a new child and that life. But I have to ask that question, how precious is that if you're born in servitude? And we're very, very blessed, in my opinion, here in North America compared to many places in the world. And the number of people that we actually have here is minuscule. You look at China, you look at India, you look at Africa, and how many of those humans around the world are still envious and would do anything to get here to enjoy the freedoms that we have, but yet most of us here understand how fast those freedoms are being stripped away from us, and we can't exercise those freedoms. And so to get back, I'm going to have to put my glasses on to make sure I can read this, but to get back to the dilemma that we're in this day, or the new situation that they've put, is the Supreme Court had a ruling, and I guess I want to actually go back, and this is one of the problems, and I didn't finish about our Constitution. It's a divide and conquer Constitution. And what I mean by that is that the 7 wolves from the east can vote and say, we're going to take the lambs from the 5 sheep of the west, or the 1, and we can legally do that because we're the majority. And that's called tyranny of the majority. And John Stuart Mills wrote down in the States years ago that the tyranny of the majority is no different than the tyranny of the 1, but yet it's constitutional. And that's what the judges said yesterday. Oh, this is constitutionally okay. But it is interesting that 3 of the 9 judges said that, no, this isn't constitutionally okay. And our wonderful premier, he's delighted with that. And yes, I am too. But the fact of the matter is, if we are being sent to jail or we're going to have our business shut down, the verdict is that we're guilty and they're going to tax our business. And again, going back to Reagan, how many of you have heard this old saying? Tax more what you want less of and less what you want more of. And so what the Supreme Court and what Ottawa and the federal government said yesterday is that we want a lot less of Alberta. And we're going to tax you more to ensure that there is less of you. And again, this is a flat out attack on Albertans, on our industry, and it's constitutionally legal. And I'm going to go back and say the problem and what upsets me in all of this, and when there's an unjust law and that's being imposed on you, it's actually the duty of us citizens to stand up and say no. And there's been lots of citizens that have gone to different rallies and protests and sent letters, but we're not getting anywhere. But we need to keep fighting, and we need to show people that there actually is a way out of this, and that we just don't need to ask permission. And what Jason's biggest flaw is that he went to them to ask permission rather than just say flat out no. I've talked before about the TransCanada or TC Energy's Nova Gas transmission expansion line that was here in Alberta, and how the 19th of February, a year ago, that it passed the National Energy Board's criteria, the new really stiff criteria with upstream, downstream, and all the other extra stuff they put in there. They gave the go-ahead. But because of Bill 69, which we call the No More Pipelines Bill, it then went and was hijacked by cabinet, political group, to say whether or not we could build that. And it was inside our own province. And Jason did nothing then when he absolutely promised that he's going to fight for jobs and he's going to fight for pipelines. But here we were, constitutionally allowed to do it, and he did nothing. And we waited 240 days where they even broke their own legislation where they're supposed to have 90, but isn't COVID great? We can postpone it and postpone it and postpone it. 240 days later, in October 19th, federal cabinet came out and says, yeah, we'll allow it to go ahead, but by the way, there's 5 new conditions on there. And 3 of those conditions were open-ended, meaning that we don't really know what the extent or the scope is going to be. And what did our premier and our energy minister say when they got up to the podium? We're so pleased that we've got the go-ahead on that, and we'll work with the energy companies to meet these new requirements because and they didn't use this exact word, but because it's onerous, we'll work with them to get that done. I don't think that TC Energy is going to build it. We'll see, come next year, but because of the cost and the situation, I see another pipeline loss, another situation in peril. But I want to go and read a few of the quotes from these 3 dissenting judges, because they are profound in the situation that I find us in. 2 of the justices, Russell Brown and Malcolm Rowe, argue that the carbon tax law tramples on provincial rights, and opens the door to further intrusion. Justice Cote wasn't quite so strong, but says it gives the federal cabinet too much power. And then to read the quote, Brown and Rowe say that the law is a massive overreach by Ottawa in an area that falls squarely within provincial jurisdiction. It's quite profound to me. This court, a self-proclaimed guardian of the Constitution, should condemn, not endorse, the Attorney General of Canada's leveraging of the importance of climate change and the relative popularity of Parliament's chosen policy response to fundamentally alter the division of powers analysis, the division of powers. And then he also said, a model of federalism that rejects our Constitution and rewrites the rules of Confederation. And so that's pretty explicit on the overreach in this Supreme Justice's opinion. And then he says, its implications go far beyond the carbon tax law, opening the door to federal intrusion by the way of imposition of national standards into areas of provincial jurisdiction, including intra-provincial trade, commerce, health, and the management of our natural resources. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I think I want to go straight into Justice Cote's quote as well. When an act endows a select few with the power to rewrite and thus re-engineer a law which affects virtually every aspect of individuals' daily lives and provincial, industrial, economic, and municipal activities, it goes too far. The Act is currently written, employs a discretionary scheme that knows no bounds. And that's kind of it in a nutshell of where we're at. There is no bounds. And it's interesting because the other 6 judges answered to this and says, no, this is there's very clear definitions on why we can do this because it's in the national interest. And we'll read one other one here that I put down. But a residual and circumscribed power of last resort that preserves the exhaustiveness of the division of power and shouldn't apply to healthcare and education. So they're saying you don't need to worry about it. This won't apply to healthcare and education. And my response when I read that is, are you kidding me? Do you think for a second that Trudeau and COVID isn't going to say that this isn't of national interest? And boom, that it goes immediately into the healthcare system? I think we're already there. And are you kidding me? You don't think that Trudeau, who, if you remember, was it 2 summers ago? If you were pro-life, you couldn't get a federal grant, regardless of what your charitable organization was, because it went against what? His so-called religious beliefs. And he condemned every charitable organization in this country that was pro-life and says, no, there's no taxpayers' money. They've already implemented into areas of healthcare, of religious freedom, of education. And these, I want to say, naive Supreme Court justices say that, oh, there's no worry, there's nothing to worry about. I'm sorry, I totally disagree, and I have zero trust in these individuals at the Supreme Court level. And we in Alberta have to realize that our very livelihood is at stake here. And I've said many times in the past, and again, I'm very frustrated with this so-called referendum on equalization, and it's a spoof, in my opinion. All it is a delay tactic, so that he can strategize and say we're going to do something about it. He should have done something the day he got into power. He should have started acting on this thing and not axed the carbon tax. He should have axed all the federal powers that were being used here in the province, in our healthcare, our education, our oil and gas industry. But he's done nothing for 2 years, and he wants to wait another 6 or 8 months to have a referendum. And then for some reason, he thinks that he's going to what? He's going to sidetrack all of the discussion and say that he's now out east talking to people about how bad and upset Albertans are on equalization, but he's not going to do anything. And for me, that's very frustrating. And I go so far personally is that I truly believe that there shouldn't be an interference of church and state. But I argue that their church, their religious fanaticism over climate, anti-oil and gas, that's a religion. And it's intruding on our freedom of livelihood and our freedom of religion on how we want to practice. But they declared out there that it's okay. No, it's not okay, and something needs to be done about it. But COVID has really been a tool that not only Justin and Premier Kenney, many of the leaders around the world have seized this opportunity and says that this is a great opportunity that we have of taking control of all of those people out there that are doing things that aren't good, that are destroying the economy, they're overpopulating the world, they're doing all these terrible things, and they continue to attack. And the question is what can we do? And that's why I'm here. It's deteriorated immensely since June 30th, when the Wild Rose Independence Party was formed. And I just, even then, I couldn't believe where we were. But yet when we see now where we are, the acceleration, and you talk about a hockey curve, that's what we're experiencing here. The attack on our freedom is immense. And so the question is what can we do and what should we do? And I will say the most important thing that we need to do is to form a party, to form CAs, to sell a membership, and to replace this corrupt and misguided government that we have at the provincial level, because we're going to become a have-not province. And again, I've said so many times in the past, equalization will change as soon as Alberta becomes a have-not province. When they've destroyed our economy, when we have nothing that we can do here, and we can't, we're dependent on Ottawa, at that point they'll say, oh, by the way, you're right, equalization doesn't work and we're not going to do it anymore. And hey, you guys are on your own, good luck. But by the way, you can't have the farm, you can't have the oil and gas. We're taking all your livelihood away, but good luck. You're deplorables. You don't deserve to be out there, and shame on you for what you've done to our world and to our environment, and good luck. And so that's the situation. And so I say that no, this is the silver lining in this, is that more and more Albertans every week are realizing and understanding where we're at, because we've been in a state of denial, saying, oh, they don't really mean that. Oh, they're going to come to realize how important oil and gas is. Oh, they need to hope that they need to heat their homes. They need to bring their food in. They don't. And Pat, I'm not sure where she is, shared a priceless story with me yesterday. I'm sure many of you know that the Hozaks lost their barn last year. And with that barn, they lost their sheep and they lost their chickens, and they don't have any more. And their little grandson, Logan, always used to love coming out and gathering up the eggs and picking up those eggs and bringing them in. And that's what they've always had to eat, was farm eggs, fresh eggs, what they say, field run chicken eggs. Anyways, wasn't too long after the eggs were gone, he's in shopping with his mother, or maybe it was it with you, Pat, or with his mother? I think it was with his mother. Yeah, with his mother. And lo and behold, the mother's buying eggs and shows him these eggs, and he's just so excited. We've got to go tell grandma that you can get eggs at the store. But the lesson is important, because this is the disconnect that so many people have. They might want to condemn chickens, but they love their McNuggets. They want to condemn dairying, but they love their milk. That we have such a disconnect from so many people now, they have no idea. But where the real disconnect is, and where the hurt is they have no understanding of hydrocarbons and the blessing that it has been to humanity throughout the world. And their desire to stop the use of that. How many trees would we have if we go back to warming everything up with wood? We do have quite a bit of coal. But the quality of life, and I've said many times in the past as well, if we really cared about humanity and wanted to help those other countries that don't have what we have, there's two things that we have technologically that we really have, and it's important to them. Number one is that we should be giving them little 5-pound or 10-pound bottles of propane that they can go and get and they can cook and use. And the other thing is the advancements with water sterilization and water filters is amazing. And then it's very easy to give those people clean water and fuel to cook and to bathe and to work with. And yet we fail to do those two most important things to do that, but yet we want to shut down that blessing and say, well, no, you shouldn't have it. These are evil, bad things, and we want to control you. And so it goes back to where Alberta needs to be that beacon of hope. Alberta needs to be that free market. Alberta needs to be that opportunity where we continue to develop and show the world what you can do with your resources. I'll share another story that I remember. I was in Banff at an environmental conference. Can't remember whether it was in 2008 or 2010 or 11, probably 10 or 11. But anyways, this infamous Canadian, David Suzuki, any of you heard of him? David Suzuki? Well, his daughter, 7, was there speaking to the conference and how we need to be more environmentally responsible. And I was quite intrigued with it. And I don't know, how many of you realize that David Suzuki took his family and lived down in the Amazon jungle for 1 or 2 years? Anybody realize that? Well, 7 was very young when she was down there, and they became great friends with the tribe there and the tribal chief. And years later, I think she was 16 or 17, she said, when they flew the chief up to Vancouver to meet David Suzuki and to see what he had. And again, this is to me the story of the blind people that go to meet the elephant, and one goes and gets the trunk, and another one gets a tusk, and another one gets the tail, and another one walks into the side, and they all have a totally different experience. But they took that chief up on the top of Grouse Mountain and looked down into Vancouver and all that was there. And in Seven's exact words, she said, he turned to my father and says, "You made all of this out of Mother Earth?" And David was embarrassed and said, "Yes, that's what we've done to Mother Earth." But there's no question in my mind that that chief was absolutely marveled at the miracle of what humanity here in Vancouver was able to make out of Mother Earth. And that's what, the Western civilization and freedom has produced. There's so many blessings that we have. I remember one of my first interviews when I realized that I should start recording everything that I say. Alberta Views in Edmonton came to interview me, and they asked me, "What would be your utopia, Paul?" And I said, "Oh boy," I said, "I'm a country boy. I love the outdoors." And I says, I would love to go back to the 1890s with two caveats. There's two things that I want to take back with me to the 1890s. Anybody have any offers? What they would, if they could go back to the 1890s and you could take two things back with you, what would you take? Okay, he says a gun. What's that? Plumbing? I can live without plumbing. I said that I wanted to take back refrigeration. I want to be able to freeze my produce and then to have that through the year and preserve it. It's so much easier than smoking and drying and everything else. So I said I want to take back refrigeration. But I said the most important thing for me to take back, and I see one of the more modern miracles of the world, was antibiotics. Up until antibiotics were discovered, when you got a cut and an infection, it was the only thing you had was prayer and hope. There was nothing else that you could do. I mean, they put poultices on and different things, but it was totally up to your own body. And I just says, that to go back and the fact that if you're sick or something else and to get antibiotics, it was a great miracle and a game changer for humanity. Anyways, when they wrote the article, the individual actually wrote in there and says, Hinman's a real redneck. He wants to go back to the 1890s and he's against refrigeration and antibiotics. and I called the guy up and I says, like that isn't what I said. And he says, yes, it is. And I said, I think I know what I said. And he says, well, I think I know what I said, and I've got the notes, and I wrote it down. I says, well, I actually think I speak faster than you write. Anyways, he wouldn't retract it, and he just flat out says, no, that's what you said. And I says, well, no, I went to become a pharmacist. I believe in antibiotics and the blessing of pharmaceuticals. I mean, it's a game changer for humanity. He says, no, you didn't. You're just changing that now. But that's what you're up against with mainstream media. And they did it. So after that, and I forget too often, but usually when I'm talking, especially with the CBC or a left, I record my interviews now because of that experience. But that's what we're up against, is even when you've said the truth, they'll twist it and use it against you and try and make us look like evil, terrible, selfish individuals. And we have to stand up and say no, and we have to have trust. The other thing that's amazed me with humanity is that we can know somebody, and I've known Danny for a long time, and have a great deal of respect for him, and he's someone that I call, what do you think about this? And we talk a lot, maybe too much. I think Danny talks more than me, though. But it's interesting to me that if somebody in here that I don't know came up to me tonight and said all these slanderous things about Danny, who I've known for a long time, human nature seems to be this negative Nelly attitude that, you know what, I knew that something like that was what Danny was really like. I just don't know him good enough. And this is what too many Albertans, too many Canadians do. If somebody comes along and says something bad about us, oil and gas is bad, they're doing all these terrible things, they're polluting the water, they're polluting the air, they're polluting the land, and too many people in the city who don't know anything about this, their knee-jerk reaction, yeah, I knew that, yeah, we need to stop this. And so it goes back full circle to the eggs and to hydrocarbons. They have no concept of the benefit and the miracles that it is in their lives, and yet they want to condemn it and say, yeah, I know this is bad, I know this is wrong. And so we have a real battle on our hands. And the question is can we win? And so my pep talk is that I've run 3 times, 4 times, 3 times. It is 4 times, I think. I've won twice, I've lost twice. Both times that I have won, I went out door knocking for 6 months before an election, and I talked to the people face to face at the doors. Both times that I've lost, there's been a snap 30-day election called. Can't get out and talk to people. The government does a great job of smearing and saying what you can or shouldn't be doing and all these terrible things about you. And I've lost. But I can assure you that we can start at 3% in the polls. I've done it twice. Gone out door knocking, talked to the neighbors, talked to everybody, got volunteers that helped me do that, and won. The first time that I lost, Premier Stelmach and 4 of his ministers came down to my riding, promised tens of millions of dollars of benefits, and just flat out told the mayors, the Reeves, the school boards and stuff, if Hinman gets back in, you're not going to get any of these things. This is only on condition that you vote Hinman out. And they do that all the time. They'll deny it, but they do that all the time. I mean, even up here with Ray Daniluk, there was a lot of things that were promised. And again, I like Ray. He's a great MLA. He represented his people. But the promises were withdrawn when the Wild Rose won. That no, we're not going to do that. They want to punish the people if you don't vote and do them. It's not anything about equity or equal treatment or anything else. No, they have all these government grants. I call them political slush funds, where they reward people that vote for them. They punish areas and people that don't. But by going out and talking to the people, going door to door, you can sign up members and you can get the votes. But long story short, with all of that intrusion into my riding, I only lost by 49 votes. But I was happy because I don't like being in that pig pen. Edmonton is not a fun place to be, and it's discouraging at times when you get in there and you see all the garbage that goes on. But the fact is that pig pen is nothing to the trenches that our grandparents, our uncles and aunts went through for us to have our freedoms. And so we need to say that, no, we're willing to go and serve and fight for our freedoms there. But my challenge to each and every one of you is to go out and to sell at least a membership a month. Be better if it was one a week, but to someone that you know. And that growth is amazing, because the number one question that we get confronted with is, oh, I like what you've got there. No, it all makes sense. It's good, but oh, we can't split the vote. Like we can't afford to split the vote. My first argument today on that is does it make a difference if I drop you from a building that's 100 feet high or 300 feet high? If you had a preference, where would you prefer to get dropped from? Probably the 100, because you don't have so much time to think about it. 300 feet, that you go through hell for a lot longer. I once slipped when I was mountain climbing. I only slipped about 12 feet. And boy, I didn't know that so many things could go through your brain so fast in that millisecond. But that was a time, I was young, so I guess it was easier to go through my whole life. I was only 14 or 15, but your life flashes before your eyes in a second. And so if you're falling from 100 feet, I can't imagine the torture that some of us people might go through, and 300 would be too much. But that's my question for you. Is it better that we get dropped from 100 feet from the UCP and taking away our freedoms, or from 300 feet from the NDP? The result's going to be the same. Both of them have said that we're going to try and meet the Paris Accord. I mean, I just saw in the city of Edmonton that $42 billion they estimate they have to spend in order to meet the Paris Accord. $42 billion. And then you start to read to see what they're going to do. I mean, we'd have to tear down a building like this because it'd be far too hard to insulate it and to fix it up, but the insulation isn't good. And what did Rachel do? Like, obviously you guys didn't apply and get any Easterners to come in here and replace your lights. But what did we spend? $40 million for Eastern companies to come in and to put in new energy efficient lights? I mean, government is the problem. It continues to be the problem, and they want to run our lives, and I think they know how to run it better than us. Albertans are smart enough. If our electrical bill is $90 a month, then we switch to LED lights and we can drop it down to $40 and only have to spend $40. Yeah, it's worth it. But if we're going to have to spend $1,000 to put in the new state-of-the-art LED lights and then pay a company to do it because you're not allowed to do it yourself, well then no, it's not worth it. And there's so many things that just make no sense when government gets involved, and we need to say no to those things. And the way we say no is building our constituency, finding a good person to run that's going to represent you in this area. And if we don't do that, I'm going to quote Bible Bill Aberhart, my favorite political quote. And he said to the people in the dirty 30s, if you haven't suffered enough, it's your God-given right to suffer more. And that's really the situation that we're in. If we're not willing to get up and fight for this, our children and our grandchildren are going to have to suffer a level that we never have in our lifetime. There's no question in my mind, if we stay inside Canada, we will not be able to, our children's children will not be able to pay off that debt. But the fact of the matter is that they'll probably have that great reset that Trudeau's just so excited to run into and to sign on to this great reset. We will be happy because we own nothing. We have no responsibilities because we've had to give it up to the government. And what's really scary is, because we don't really study history, is that too many of the younger people somehow think because currently they don't own anything and they're happy, that they think that later on in life, if they don't own anything, they'll still be happy. But they usually, hit that wall and realize that, wow, I've got to buy a car, or I've got to get a job, I've got to pay my rent, I've got to buy a house. But they don't see that when they're young, and our education system is such that they don't really teach them, the hardships of life, and that we need to be responsible. And so, again, my question to each and every one of you is this worth the fight? Are we willing to get out and to, well, first of all, how many, I hope that you've gone to our website, wildrose.party, that you've looked at our principles, you've looked at our purpose, and you read that and says, yeah, this is what we need to do. We need to take control of things. And we don't need to ask Ottawa for permission. We don't need to go to the Supreme Court to say whether or not we can build a pipeline. They don't respect the Constitution. I mean, the Constitution is very explicit on the right to get your products throughout Canada and to sell to the world. And they have not allowed us to do that with our oil and gas. We had trouble with Mad Cow in 2004. The federal government, again, basically shut down the beef industry, wouldn't help it in that crisis. And they have a terrible track record of not standing up for industry and respecting the Constitution. And there's no reason that we should say, well, okay, we'll respect Section 92, but 121 doesn't matter and it's not important to us because that's our livelihood. No, they don't respect 121. Why on earth would we as Albertans worry about Section 91 and say, oh yeah, you've got us? No, we need a premier who's going to put and take the steps that's necessary to show Albertans that we can and should be independent. The number one thing that we need to do is to create our own police force. We don't need Justin telling our police what we can and can't do, and to have federal thugs at the airport that basically arrest our citizens when they fly back in and take them off to quarantine and no rhyme or reason. There's actually cases of people that I know that have come through the border down at Coots, which only about 90 kilometers away from where I'm living right now, and they go in and they talk to two border agents. Both been to the same place, both did the same thing. The one agent says, nope, you got to go into quarantine. You can't go out for 14 days. The other agency says, oh, okay, yep, everything's good. You're free to go. It's arbitrary. And whenever there's arbitrary rules, there's abuse of them. It's hard enough when you have the rule of law and you can go and read it and cite it, but yet when it's just arbitrary and an individual has all kind of powers, it's unbelievable what we see that happens. And I've heard the same story about people flying in on the airplane where one is being told that you're going to the hotel, oh, you're free to go. Husband and wife. Are you kidding me? And they said, no, we're not separating. But that's the kind of stuff that goes on. It's unacceptable. We need to stand up. So we need our own police force. When Justin says that, oh, you need to go and confiscate all of those guns. No, we need our own police force. We need our attorney general and our justice minister to say, no, you're not going to touch people's property. It belongs to them. It was legal before. Just because of an order in council or some ridiculous law, we're not going to do that. We just need to have our own police force that has civilian oversight, not political oversight, so that it actually protects the people rather than punish and give fines to the people. It's backwards. The second most important thing that we need, in my opinion, is we need to create the Alberta Revenue Agency. We send $50 billion to Ottawa, and then we sit there with our hand out begging for money to come back to do things. It's just wrong. We need to collect all that taxes. We can be nice if we want to start with and pass on what is theirs. Or we can say, you know what, we don't believe in that federal program. No, we're not going to send $1 billion or $500 million over to this part of the country or to that part of the world. No, we're not going to do that. You, the rest of Canadians are welcome to do that, but we in Alberta, we're not going to do that. We need oversight of our tax dollars, and we need to pay off our debt, already over $100 billion. The third thing that we need to do is to put an Alberta pension plan. The Canadian pension plan is flawed. It just survives from year to year, and they need to get enough money in to pay the seniors other places in Canada. We actually put in about $2.5 billion more per year, and this will change in this last year because of COVID, but we over-contribute a vast amount, and that goes to enhance other seniors. We could enhance our seniors' payments here and reduce the workers' premiums and do very, very well. And to me, we just need to do it. We need our own employment insurance program. Why do we work hard here so that other parts of Canada have to work, a lot less weeks and a lot less hours, and they receive the insurance premium? Again, we over-contribute to that, and we could help here a great deal. We need our own immigration policy. We want to bring people in that actually contribute, whether it's family-sponsored or business-sponsored, is very important. And if we don't do that, it's not going to work. And we can't have Justin bringing in people and sending them out here saying, well, they need to be on the taxpayer's dole. This is my goal, to bring these people in. But these are a few of the steps that we need to take. Once we form government and we implement those things, I firmly believe that Albertans will realize is that, wow, we are independent. We really don't need Ottawa for anything. We can have a military base here. We've got two great ones with Cold Lake up in the north and Suffield down in the south. We've got everything that we need. When you look at our universities, you look at our healthcare, you look at our people and their ethics and their work ethics and how hard they work. The only thing that's holding us back is a government out east that says that we can't do it, when we're not only able to do it, we're willing to do it, but they just stop us. And so I urge you again, go out, build the membership, put donations into your CA, into the provincial party, and we'll be there for Albertans. But that's really all I really wanted to say tonight. I love opening it up for questions. That's probably the most important part. But together we can do this. The sky's the limit, but we actually have to pull on our boots, put on our work gloves, and we've got to go and do it. But thank you very, very much for coming out. Thank you for those that have tuned in online. And at this point, we'll open it up to questions from the floor. And I think, Drew, you have questions coming in online as well, or they? We're good. No questions? No questions yet. Oh my goodness. Well, and
don't be shy. I just got a question. Looking through with the treaty with First Nations and whatnot, I see that real clear. There's sort of a statement in there about there will be no special groups, everyone treated equally.
yeah.
And I know just online this night now comes up what's going to happen to the treaty, what's going to happen to the treaty.
Okay, excellent question, and I'll repeat it. We actually have a mic if people want to ask a question, we'll pass it around. But he asked, what about the treaties in the First Nations? And it's an excellent question, and I want to start off with, we here are upset and think that we're not being treated very fair, and I consider us as second or third class citizens in Canada. But when I look and see the way they've treated the First Nations, I think, wow, like should we even be complaining? And I just see as one country, one citizen, one law as a great benefit. And I actually believe that if we show them that, they'll want to do that. But I would totally respect their desire to say, hey, we want to sit back and just watch, see what happens. I mean, when we separate, we'll still be under the crown, And so the crown actually is where it comes from. And again, the other thing with the Indigenous people is it's very hard for us to negotiate or talk to them when we're not in government. They very much understand that, and they work and talk with government officials. And again, to me, it's not a panic. We can show them what we're doing that second year before we hold a successful referendum. Once we've taken those steps and they can see that success, that they would own their own land. They could decide what they want to drill and what they don't, and they would have control of their decision making. I've been told that there's billions of dollars being held in trust federally from the royalties off of the land that has been drilled and the resources extracted, and they don't even have access to it. And so I think that, like I say, being equal citizens would be good, but we would leave it up to them. And another argument some people say is that, oh, we've got to have these borders and keep everything, you know, like an iron curtain almost. I don't believe that. I grew up and very close, went to school with Indigenous people from the Piikani and from the Kainai, two very large reserves in southern Alberta. And they actually, being part of the blood tribe, they can go back and forth across the border to their relatives across the US-Canadian border just with their treaty card to show who they are. And I just don't see that as a problem even here, if in fact they first don't want to join us. But that's my view, my understanding of what we can do. But that answer your question, or does that bring up another question? No, appreciate that.
Anyone else have any questions?
Paul, is the plan to stay within the borders of Alberta, like the border sides of Alberta? And if we do, what happens to a city like the city of Alberta?
That is a conundrum. I don't know if there's another town or city that we have that's actually cross borders. Is Lloydminster the only one that's here? Where is it? How big is Empress? Oh, that one we'll be able to figure out. I just have, again, for the people online, he asked, you know, where will the borders actually be? It is provincial. When you have a referendum, it would be provincial, so it would be the provincial border. But I'm confident that we'd be able to work something out in one version or another. But my true belief is that once Alberta takes these steps, Saskatchewan and northern BC would want to be part of a new Wild Rose Nation and to be part of that freedom and that prosperity. And so I think that we would be. Well, I thought that you're on both sides, so you just shift which side of the town you want to be on. Okay, well. It's a good question. I don't see it as an overwhelming problem. And like I say, I really see that once Westerners see the prosperity that a free market government that actually puts in place a constitution that protects our life, our freedom, our property, and our pursuit of happiness. I mean, anywhere in the world where they've had a constitution and they've had that they recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, people want to be there. And I truly see BC and Saskatchewan following us. And so we'll be one country here in the West.
You do have a question here.
Hey?
Paul, are you in dialogue with the Buffalo Party in Saskatchewan?
I spoke with the Buffalo Party shortly after, I guess it was just a few days before their election. They did very well on short notice, but I have not reached out lately and need to. But again, the job's massive here in Alberta. I've spoke to the people in BC, and BC actually, if you can, I'm not sure, maybe I'm not even supposed to say this, but they've actually started the Dogwood Party. We have the Wild Rose Party here, and they have the Dogwood Party in BC that's been registered. And I've had dialogue with them. They've reached out and spoke with them, but we'll certainly in the future.
The fact is, the way the Clarity Act is, you have to go, Section 31, you have to vote province by province. So you sort of have to organize the campaign in your own province, and you have to win it. And then Saskatchewan has to do the same thing. I mean, they could call and ask, how are we organizing here? But the fact is, it's a fight, each province has to fight themselves. But
yeah.
one of the questions that we had to know that we get as we go around is, like, why aren't our MLAs standing up for us? Like, it's pretty clear how frustrated for certain the rural people are about these lockdowns, and why are the rural MLAs like not getting to speak for
Yep.
our people?
Okay, I'm not sure if you can hear it online, but the question is why are MLAs not speaking out for us on an individual constituency level? And the answer is very simple, in my opinion. We have what they call the party whip in most of the party systems. The Wild Rose Independence Party is very different. We actually believe in accountability and recall. And one of the benefits that I see in recall is that the leader isn't responsible for the individual MLAs. The actual constituents are. And so the leader actually can say, well, you know, that's not between me and the people of, and what's the name you're writing here? Vermilion Lloydminster. That it's between them and the MLA, and I truly believe that, and I think that if somebody's stepped out of line to who they represent, that should be the case. When I was originally when I was the leader of the Alberta Alliance and then the Wild Rose back in 2008 after we merged, I had an individual that was running up in Grand Prairie. And back in those days, we still had the wheat board, and that was a controversial difference. Northern Alberta is much more in favor of the wheat board than Southern Alberta was. And this individual said, well, I can't run because in our documents, it said that we were against the wheat board. No Kyoto, no wheat board, and no gun control. And I says, well, Dale, I would be very disappointed if you're representing Grand Prairie and your people want the wheat board. I would expect you to be voting for the wheat board. And that's what a democratic system is supposed to be, is that the person that you elect is supposed to be representing you, not me, not the party, not Trudeau or someone else or their beliefs. They should be accountable to the local CAs through recall. And again, not a recall bill that's impossible like Bill 51. I want to see them amend it. I think that the highest level for a recall bill should be 50% of the number of voters who voted in the last election plus one. So in Lloyd here is about, I don't know, there 20,000 votes. So if you wanted to recall that individual, it would take 10,001 vote to recall them. And again, I would see 120 days to go out and to recall an individual. And I also believe the day after they're elected, that's the day they're accountable. It's not 18 months in, and it's not the last 6 months. No, 50% of the time you're only going to be accountable. And what's really upsetting to me in their recall bill is if your local MLA was nervous and thought that, wow, this is controversial, what's coming up. I need my friends to start a recall bill on, I don't know, let's say the color of the water, and they're upset because I promised to change it and I didn't. They could go and try and recall him on that and fail, and then he's vaccinated because you can't recall him in that 4-year period again if you've had one failed recall. Are you kidding me? So if you get away with one crime and you're not punished, you're free to commit any other ones for the next 4 years because you're vaccinated from recall? It's an insult to Albertans, Premier Kenney's recall bill. But no, we need accountability. And that way they have to represent you, because if you don't, you go sign the petition and you fire them, and there's a by-election. Hope that answers that question. Drew.
We have another one online. Connie wants to know, what is the party stance on gun control?
What is the party's stance on gun control? Well, in our Constitution, I think the most important thing first of all, the Constitution needs to protect the individual. This idea of this is good for society, every tyrant in history has used that excuse, saying that this is the good for society. No, it's the individual that needs to be protected. His life, their property, their pursuit of happiness, their freedoms. And that needs to be paramount. But on top of that, each of us as citizens have responsibilities. And I believe our personal responsibilities, that we're personally responsible for our health, we're responsible for our wellness, and we're responsible for our safety. And we need to have castle law. And I'm sorry, but if there's an intruder that's come through your front door, you don't need to try and assess to see whether or not your life is at risk. I would say that it is at risk when somebody intrudes and comes into your house, whether they're high on drugs or something else, and you have the right to defend your property and your life, and you should be able to be armed and use the weapon of your choice to defend your life and your property and your family. Is that clear enough? So thanks, Connie, for the question. Excellent and a very important question. I'll even go a step further when you mention that. I think one of the problems in our legal system, because we need to have, not only do we need our own police force, we need our own justice system. We need justices that are actually representing Alberta and our values. That back in the old days, when I was young and you're watching the crime shows or the police shows or whatever, there was a big halt. What would the police say? Stop or I'll shoot. I mean, today it's stop or else I won't bother chasing you. And off they run. And I'm sorry, that doesn't work. Like we need to have respect for the rule of law, and we need to have respect for those people that hold those positions. And I believe they should be able to holler out, stop or I'll shoot. And people should stop. But again, we're so twisted and upside down on our laws and who we're actually protecting. I mean, the perpetrator generally has more rights than the victim. And we've seen it here in Alberta over the last 3 or 4 years. Maybe it's been longer than that. So it seems like it's that. But how many people do we know that have been in court because they pulled out a weapon to try and defend themselves? And it's just wrong. That we need to actually protect our citizens from shenanigans, skullduggery, the thuggery, anything that's going on. We have the right to defend ourselves, and we shouldn't have to be worrying on whether the courts are going to come after us because an intruder or a thief or whatever came after us, and we're more worried about the law and what it's going to do to us than what this perpetrator does. It's wrong, and it needs to change.
Question. What is your plan for the environment side? It seems like you're always involved with the environment is getting done in.
Yeah.
Regard to pipelines and everything. Like, you don't have the environment worked out in your plan. How do you tell us to the people?
Okay. His question is what is our environmental plan? There's no question to me, and the proof is in the pudding. When you go and look at our pristine environment, we look after our land. We're serious about that. We look after our air. We've got scrubbers, and we look after the pollutants that are being emitted, and we look after our water. And I always say the environmental law, our land, our air, and our water will continue to protect the environment. But this idea to protect ideology is a problem, and we will actually balance. And pollutants are pollutants, but for those religious fanatics that think that CO2 is poison, it's plant food. And the evidence is overwhelming that world crop production has gone up because we were getting to a critical point of where our CO2 was declining. And if you go back 10,000 years and you see where it was going, I mean, how on earth do we have all the coal that we have? And the forests that were here at that time that developed those forests and the dinosaurs and stuff, it was a very lush planet. And the CO2 levels have gone up and down. And I use the analogy that if we're trying to save for our retirement, every penny does count. But it's your job that's the big contributor to your retirement. But just because you go around and you collect pop bottles and save that doesn't mean that that's where your retirement's going to be. You can't run around and say, oh, I'm just going to collect pop bottles for the rest of my life and give up your job. CO2, yes, it is has a warming effect, but we know without a question that the warmth comes from the sun. And yet that's never put into the factor on the change. And the sunspots, the 32-year cycle, and there's all kinds of other cycles. And yes, there is some warming effect because of CO2 and because of methane, but it's like saying that our entire retirement fund has come from collecting pop bottles when in fact, no, we've had a job and we've worked hard and we've saved over our lifetime. But we have to say no to the Paris Accord. We can't say that, oh, we're going to eliminate that, the poverty that's going to inflict on the world and on us as individuals, and the impact on our quality of life is immense. And like I say, just the city of Edmonton, they want to spend, I think they're debating it this Thursday, next Thursday, they want to spend $42 billion to get to zero emissions. And for why? So that we undermine our quality of life, so that we transfer wealth to some other part of the world. That I'm sorry, we know how to look after our environment. We have clean water, we have clean air, and we have clean land, and we'll keep it that way. It'll be the pollutants that we work on.
People out there, advocating farmers, have really put an incident in our advertising and brainwashing. I call it brainwashing. They know how to brainwash. I think that's going to be a big step.
It is a big step, but it's the truth, and we're on the right side of the debate. I mean, again, let's even go back and use two situations here. COVID. How many tickets have been issued and how many businesses closed? And yet we still, I don't know of anybody that's had their day in court yet. And why do they not do that? And again, when we went after the carbon tax, what the fight should have been was, and again, in our Constitution, it says anytime our freedoms are lost or taken away, and whether that's our livelihood, our religious freedoms, our assembly freedoms, our speech freedoms, it says that it has to be justified. But how does it have to be justified? Demonstrably. And what does that mean? It has to be conclusive. And if we got to go to court to fight over that and then show us the conclusion on what your, and again, that their computer modeling, how good was it with COVID? I mean, I just want to say that individual from England, from Imperial College, who's notorious for not knowing up from down, the whole world, oh my goodness, we're going to have, what did Jason Kenney say? Were we going to have 100,000 deaths? I don't remember the numbers. Like, it was a scary number, but it's not justified. And again, even here in the province, those restaurants that have opened and the other ones, when they've had their day in court, they always withdraw before they go to court. Why? Because they can't justify it. And we just got to start standing up and say, I'm sorry, no, we're not going to go to your ideology, because if you want to be, and again, no offense, I've got a daughter-in-law who's a vegetarian, but if you want to be a vegetarian, live that life. But if I want to enjoy protein and other things, we let people have those freedoms to do that. But you can't say that and again, what really bothers me about these hypocrites is that they say we can't use hydrocarbons, but yet if you look at them, you'll see that, wow, they've got an Apple computer that's used out of aluminum, they've got silver in there, they've got all of this stuff, their clothes have got, their polyester clothes, and they're literally covered with it. And I had this one young university student who was challenged me on that, and she was standing in front of me, and the professor beside says, oh no, this lady, she walks the talk. And I looked at her, and looked at him, I said, are you serious? And this individual's going to U of A, and I says, where do you live? Oh, I walk. I says, really? So where do you live? Oh, I live in the apartments just down on 107. And I says, and how do you heat those apartments? And do you ever turn on the lights? And do you ever use the elevator? Well, yes. She had no clue of how much hydrocarbons that she was using. And then she had the audacity to say, well, I try to live the 100-mile diet. I mean, we need to educate these people. They need that rude awakening that you actually can get eggs in the farm, and they don't just exist in the grocery store. That they actually have an origin, and it's not out of the warehouse in the back of the grocery store. And it's the same with our food, our clothing, our heat, all of those things. Most of these people that want to make those claims, they have no idea how much they use themselves, and yet they want to point the finger at us. It's an education process. Yeah, no. I appreciate that. And for online people, she asked, do we have any advertising on Main Street media? It's really interesting because we actually, first of all, we don't have enough donations yet to do that. And I mean, if we had more donations and we could, then we've thought about putting out a letter saying, you know, that we want to raise this much money to put an ad in the Calgary Herald. But we've actually been told that the chances of us getting to buy an ad in there, they'll actually refuse it. And so we haven't raised the money to try and do it. This is why I go back to constituency associations. And again, we can advertise in a little local paper here, but a CA can do that. And I just believe that this is a ground war, one CA at a time, and we need to take it to our communities. And I appreciate what you're saying. And like I say, that if we've got members that want to organize and try and do that, we'd certainly look at it. But we do have 2 years to the election. And we need to have an awareness, but we're trying to use social media as our best avenue right now, and word of mouth. But appreciate the question, and we would love it if people wanted to donate $25,000 to take a full page ad out in the Calgary Herald or the Sun, and we'll find out whether or not we can do it or whether they take it off. The good news is that my tech guy tells me I'm back on YouTube. I got suspended from YouTube, I don't know, 3 weeks ago or whatever, because of my interview with Dr. Roger Hodkinson. Don't know if you've followed him and his speaking out. And I also got, that was the second one. The first one was I was speaking out on pipelines and Trudeau drinking or selling Kool-Aid to too many people and he couldn't build pipelines. And so that was kind of my first strike. And then when I did the one on COVID, they suspended me and so even social media and the censorship is a real concern for us. And that's why I say that the real thing is boots on the ground, one CA at a time, if we're going to be successful.
Great segue into the next question. Scott wants to know, how many CAs do we have formed right now?
I haven't asked Wes. If you go to our website, wildrose.party, and across the top, there's about 5 titles. One of them says constituency. You click on that. And everyone that's registered is listed. And if you're not registered on there, it's not. But I'm sure we have at least 25, and we've got like 30 in the queue of CAs, and there's 87 across the province, if people are wondering. But thanks for the question.
Very good.
Paul, just while you're on that mainstream media and getting the message out, Patrick Moore spoke at our recent conference, and he just came out with a book. It's called 11 Fake Invisible Catastrophes That Never Happened. Well, one of his good supporters wanted to put an ad in a BC paper to advertise the book. So he went to his book, and the next day the lady called back and said, sorry, you can't run that ad. So it's not even as simple as raising the money. But as you know, the mainstream media subsidies are in the neighborhood of $2 billion. So a lot of these companies, even if you go to them, say, look, we'd like to run a $2,000 ad, and say, no, thank you very much, we're getting $400,000 a year from the central government. We'll get by without your ad, thank you very much. So I think these little brochures we have, word of mouth, this is a really tough, ground war. I mean, I say, like, the bad guys we're surrounded, the bad guys have all the high ground. And quite frankly, they're using our money to fight it. You know what I mean? They take our money, Justin and company give it to the mainstream media, and you can hardly blame them. They're only surviving. They survive with the subsidy money. So it's a tough old run. Yeah.
Yep. And I guess I'm going to give a pitch here for several of the alternative media here in Alberta. We got the Western Standard, we got True North. What are some of the other ones now?
Western Standard Online.
Yeah, Western Standard Online. How many of you have watched Danielle Smith and her interviews here in the last couple of weeks? I had the privilege of being on her show last night. But those are the areas where we need to try to reach out and to get the message out. But no, the censorship, again, you talk about stripping away our freedoms. The censorship is probably the one that is most detrimental to the people getting out and getting the message on the truth, on whether it's on the environment, whether it's on hydrocarbons, on COVID. I mean, all of these things, it's very difficult to get the message out to the general public. You actually have to have the thirst and the desire to go online and look for this. And even at that, I mean, the Google searches and stuff are not easy on a lot of these, and you got to have diligence or sharing it around and be connected. And so I'll throw that pitch out. Please go to my website, paulhinman.com, register there and become a friend of Paul Hinman, because we can't reach out to you, it's very difficult, and we can at least send emails if we've got direct email. Get a phone number, we can contact that way, but again, go to the party, go to my website and sign up so that we have a little bit of a backdoor when Main Street media or government censorship or high-tech, big tech industry wants to shut us down, that we can actually communicate in a fairly efficient manner.
Well, you mentioned the lies they tell about you. You know what I mean? No. I mean, that's
Yep.
what they did you.
No, about it's about everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been saying for a long time, we live in the age of misinformation. It's hard to find the information, but the misinformation is just prevalent, and the propaganda that's out there is prevalent. And again, if you go against the narrative, it's just incredible the attacks that you get. But so, what's your point?
Well, the point is, I think we need to tell the people the lies. Like Jason is spreading lots of lies about what we're doing, what you're doing. I mean, one of the biggest lies he's telling is he's telling everybody that we're open for business. And I mean, as you know, when he first got, or maybe you don't know, but when he first got elected, he went to New York and he said, well, we're open for business here in Alberta. I should go back a little bit. I'm as bad as you for going back to the start of the story. But anyway, Patrick Moore said the world is increasingly being divided between producers of wealth and consumers of wealth.
Why don't you come here?
Okay. He said, thank you. He said, Alberta, or the world is increasingly being divided between producers of wealth and consumers of wealth. And he said, the surest way to know if someone is a producer of wealth or a consumer of wealth is whether they support the Paris Agreement. If they support the Paris Agreement, they're a consumer of wealth, because the Paris Agreement is a wealth redistribution hoax. If they're against the Paris Agreement, they're a producer of wealth, which Alberta is. But Jason Kenney, even though he did keep his promise of killing the carbon tax, or killing the carbon tax for us peasants, it's still on for the high emitters. And so the high emitters are still paying the carbon tax. And I want to tell the story about the windmills too, but they're still paying the carbon tax. So the world's investors, if anybody was thinking of coming here, they're not, because again, they would have to pay the carbon tax if they come, and if they're here, they're still looking to leave. So when he went to New York and said to the investment community, we're open for business, they said, like, are you mocking us? They said, like, since 1947, Alberta has been on the short list for energy investment from anywhere in the world. But they said, starting in 2008, when you've talked about this, Paul, when Ed Stelmach came in with his, ill-advised royalty review, we stopped being on the short list for energy investment. We went on to the long list. And when Jason was in New York, they said, you're not on the short list, you're not on the long list, and no one is planning on putting you back on the long list anytime soon, because you're still supporting the Paris Agreement. Doesn't matter how he cuts it. The other lie that Jason is increasingly telling is that the fact that we're talking about separation is making it difficult to raise capital. No, the reason it's difficult to raise capital, like Jack Mintz has said, we've lost around $350 billion of investment in Alberta's energy industry since 2008. $350 billion has left. It didn't, we weren't talking about separation then. It left because we were in the Paris Agreement. It also left because Alberta has a cost of providing services that is somewhere between 30 and 40% higher than the Canadian average, which adds up to about $12 billion a year. Our cost of providing services is at least 12, maybe 14 or $15 billion higher than the Canadian average. As bad as our deficit is, it would be almost balanced even if we provided services at an average cost. And I just want to take a second to, I know you're the guest speaker.
Oh, no, I'm the guest. You guys are.
Okay, well, thank you. But in any event, our one of our friends who was at the conference, there's a whole bunch of these big windmill farms coming in southern Alberta. And our friend selling gravel to him, and he said to the guy, like, who's subsidizing this? And the guy said, oh, no, there's no government money in this. Like, it's absolutely private sector. And he said, well, what do you get for the energy? He said, we tendered it at 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, we all know that's relatively cheap. The sort of the base rate for nuclear is 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So I said, that doesn't make sense to me. So I phoned our friend Joe Anglin, who was the power guy for us in the Wild Rose in 2012. I said, How is it possible that they're tendering at 3.5 cents? He said, well, they tender at 3.5 cents, but he said then what they do is they build the windmills and then they sell the carbon credits. Well, one of the big carbon credits for 9 cents. So one of the biggest windmill farms in southern Alberta is getting built by Suncor. So they set up a company, and when they have when they have the tax on the high emitters have two choices. They can pay the tax or they can buy carbon credits. So Suncor, instead of paying the tax, which would go into general revenue, which would help build our hospitals, build our roads, all the things that we're talking about here tonight, instead of doing that, they buy a carbon credit from their own gall-darn company in southern Alberta. So they're literally building those windmills with your money. Like, it's just that simple. I mean, it's just sort of like saying to all these farmers, well, you either have to pay your tax or buy a cow from Danny, which I wouldn't mind that idea, but nevertheless, that's how ridiculous it is. Like, when they're literally building the windmills with taxpayers' dollars. It's just that simple. And somehow we're letting them get away with that. And so we're in a difficult spot, but I mean, we have to be prepared for the fact that they're going to say that the reason they're having difficult raising money is because we're talking about separation. So, but anyway, just be prepared for that. Yeah,
it's categorically not true. I don't know how many of you watched their AGM when Jason Kenney and O'Toole were on the stage, and they said that, that the reason why we can't raise capital is because we're not, walking the environmental law. And if we don't get our house in order, we're not going to be able to raise capital. Well, no, capital is, as Danny said it out and Jack Mintz pointed out, that's been being chased out for over 12 years out of our province. I remember the dilemma, and to me, it wasn't a dilemma. We had 5 upgraders that made application back in 2008 for Northern Alberta. And what did Stelmach and company do? They put in a cap and says, oh no, there's only room for 1. And so what did they do with that? They gave a contract to Northwest Upgraders. We, the taxpayers, are on the hook for the cost of processing that. And Northwest Upgraders, they're going to make money wherever the oil is, at $25 or $125. And again, there's just so much of that shenanigan that goes on that isn't open, it isn't competitive, and it's just wrong. We should have had 5 upgraders built back in 2008 to 2015 if the government would have said we're open for business. They say that, but they don't follow it. And then they have all these rules and regulations in place. And again, how many of you are familiar with ESGs, environmental, social, and governance? That's the new law if you're wanting to get any government money and things. And again, they just come at us from every angle. They want to shut us down, but yet they let the rest of the world produce it. And why? Because we're the shining example. We're the free market. We're the entrepreneurs. And that doesn't help them with the rest of the world, who they want to have control over. And so their goal and their target to shut down Alberta. And we need to stand together and say, no, we're not going to take that. There's one more question online.
Sure. Scott wants to know, what is your views or the party's angle on public sector unions?
Public sector unions. Well, it's interesting historically that power is always abused, and there's 3 things that I'm always nervous about. Number 1 is big government. Number 2 is big industry. And number 3 is big unions. And to me, when you get any of those 3, or when they collude like we do with the auto industry, what we end up doing is paying a premium price for a poor product. And it's wrong. Unions have a very important purpose, but like government, they should be local. Centralized government it's just always a problem. Whether it's centralized out of Ottawa, centralized out of Edmonton, it's a problem. I remember back in the early 2000s, I was on the committee for basic minimum wage committee. And we traveled all over the province and listened to people come in and make their cases. And I was the only one on the committee that was against the minimum wage. And I was getting I was exasperated and trying to explain to the committee. And many people came in and made presentations, why not? But they just says, no, we have to have a set wage across the province. And back in those days, there was a real discrepancy. When we were down in Milk River, The wage of a waitress there was $7 an hour, and they just thought that was it's terrible, it's impossible, it can't be. We got to pay them more money. I think when we were in Calgary, it was like $9, but when we went up to Fort McMurray, it was $22. If you didn't pay $22, you couldn't get a worker. The owner of the Tim Hortons up in Grand Prairie back then called head office and says, we can't sell donuts at the standard price. And they just says, well, you have to. That's in the contract, what you got to do. Then they says, well, then we gotta sell the franchise. Anyways, they sent out one of the bigwigs. He showed up at the Tim Hortons up there, and he's sitting down with the manager. And there's a worker out there who's sweeping along and got on their little uniform. And all of a sudden, the broom gets set down, and the person takes off the coat, and they walk out the door. And the guy says, well, what just happened? He says, I just lost another worker. And he says, what do you mean? He says, well, that headhunter just came in and asked how much, have you made this week? And she said how much it was, and says, well, if you come with me, we'll pay you all of that, but you need to come now. We need you to work. And they couldn't keep workers in there. And they said, we got to pay $22 an hour in order to keep them here and to have staff. Anyways, the guy went away and says, yeah, I see the problem. But central government, one size fits all, doesn't fit all. And I also knew an individual that was a welder, and why I was aware down in Milk River, and he sold his house. And he's going to triple his money that he's going to make up at Fort McMurray. 2 years later, he ended up buying a 1960 mobile home that was half the size of his old home for $379,000. And he says, Paul, I'll never recover. I moved up to Fort McMurray. I tripled my wages, but my costs were through the roof. And so one size doesn't fit all. And the local union can actually represent and help a group of workers, whether it's Calgary or Fort McMurray. But why should Fort McMurray be dictating to what somebody needs down in Milk River? Another example, one that frustrated me, is when they centralized schooling. And they said, oh no, a teacher's a teacher, and it doesn't matter where in the province they teach, it's the same job, they should get the same wage. No, back then when they did that, a home in Milk River was $90,000. A home in Calgary was $250,000, and a home in Fort McMurray was $500,000. We used to have our teachers being paid by the local property taxes, and they couldn't strike. They could have their local union stuff, but how could they strike and say that, oh, I want to get paid the same amount as a teacher in Fort McMurray when that teacher, is 5 times the price for housing there? It's a local market. That's what the free market does. And so if you allow big unions, province-wide, Canada-wide, it doesn't represent the actual local union workers. It distorts the market and it causes problems. And so, no, I don't think that big unions should be allowed to exist, just like big companies and everything else. There should be a free market. They can exist, but you have to have that freedom of choice if you don't want to be part of it. Hope that answers the question.
Bill Braun, yeah, go ahead. We got a question at the back if you don't want. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
In the US, right. Together in Canada,
yeah.
It's a big problem.
Truly.
So I think maybe some years ago like that, even Harvard going into it, we were transitioning from reform to
Canadian Alliance.
yeah. And it was at any rate, I saw Stephen Harvard, and I had that brief conversation with my wife. I heard him speak, and he was really important then. I said to him, you're obviously a very bright individual, and I'd like to talk. You have to know that given enough time and circumstances, your party is going to ultimately become what all the rest become, which is the rhino. So where it's like if I think a lot of people think that, but when did the last man of real conservative? And I heard reviews that it's like the Prime Minister talking about having on the list, none of the above.
Yes.
I like that because people want, and I like what Maxine Gertie said, where he said, I say the same thing
In English?
before the election, in the middle of my term, and after.
And he also says the same thing in English that he says in French.
Yeah. So how do you, I think people are looking for the real thing. And politicians have done such terrible PR, you know, and it's hard for us to trust that this is going to be another real thing that's actually going to produce something other than what they all ultimately become. I know it's a big question.
No, it isn't. It's a simple question. I appreciate it being asked. So what he's asking is that every politician who's come along up till now, including Stephen Harper, has said that they're in a conservative, and he's saying that they're in conservative in name only. And how are we going to know if I'm any different or the Wild Rose Independence Party is any different? The 2 times that I've been elected, the favorite question I love when I go door knocking and ask the first question I ask them, do you think it makes any difference who you elect to go into the House or the legislature? And most people say, well, no, actually, no, it doesn't. And I says, well, do you think it would make a difference if you could fire them tomorrow if you were upset? Well, yeah, actually, it would be nice. And he says, well, if you don't think it makes a difference, and I agree with you, because you just got the head honcho who makes the decision, everybody else has to follow suit, whether it's federal or provincial. I says, I promise you that Paul Hinman will be different. I will represent this area, and if you don't think I will, then you can recall me. Back then, you know, it was I just gave the number because when I first ran, it was about 11,000 votes, and I told them, you know, you collect 5,500 signatures, I'll step down. I might run again, but you can recall me anytime I'm in office. Wild Rose Independence Party will be accountable through recall. And if we're not in there, you can fire us. And then you're not going to have an 18-month window or a 24-month window. If the first week we get in there and we don't pass recall legislation, that I plan on having people have to sign a pledge that we're accountable individually. And any MLA could say that today. That they could literally go out there and say, no, I will be accountable to my representatives through recall, and the 50% plus one sign a petition, I will step down and will trigger a by-election. They won't do it. Why? Because they don't want to be accountable. And again, there's two major flaws outside of the fact that our Constitution doesn't protect the individual's life, freedom, property, and pursuit of happiness. And that is number one, there's no accountability. And then we all know how even our own kids, if there's no accountability and you never get after them, what are they going to turn out like? And it's the same with politicians. When there's no accountability, I tell you, there's a lot of abuse and a lot of problems that go on. And so in our Constitution, there's going to be accountability through recall. It's going to be in the Constitution. It's not going to be passed in the legislature so that Premier Klein did us a great favor in passing legislation that we had to balance the budget, and any surplus had to pay off the debt. But you know what Premier Stelmach did as soon as he got in a little bit of trouble? After he spent the $17 billion sustainability fund, he passed legislation saying that, well, no, it's okay for infrastructure. We can run a deficit, and then it's okay for this. But if it was had Premier Klein actually put it through a referendum of the people to say that we want balanced budgets, Premier Stelmach couldn't have undone what the people had done. And there's 3 levels of kind of accountability. The first one, you have legislative law, and then that can be changed because the current government can't pass legislation that binds the next government. So whatever's been done by one can be changed by the next one. But if you pass the law of balanced budgets, and then this fall we have a referendum and the people vote and say, no, we want balanced budgets, then when the next government gets in and says, well, we don't want a balanced budget, that we see the law, we're going to change that, but oh my goodness, this was passed by a referendum, they have to go to the people, the same level that passed it. And it's the same thing. If it's in the Constitution, then they have to have a constitutional amendment, which is very hard to do. And again, it's got to go back to the people. But no, the Wild Rose Independence Party, we'll have a constitution that has accountability through recall, and we'll have a constitution that limits the size and the scope of government and the amount of tax that they can impose on the people. My vision is a tax freedom day of March 1st, meaning the 25% tax is as high as you can tax. Perhaps when we get hold of the books and we can look at it, it might have to be April 1st, 33%, but that 25 to 33%, we'll use that to pay off the debt. When the debt's paid off, then it would drop back. But those things need to be in a constitution to stop the abuse of power that people can do if they're not restrained. And again, it's very difficult to restrain the size and the scope of government if it's not in the Constitution, because that's the problem, is this divide and conquer. I could look in here and say, hey, everybody, we're going to go to town and we're going to have free beer and pizza and everything else. But all we got to do is we need to vote. Who says that all the people wearing cowboy hats have to pay?
I'm for that. Yeah, I'm for that. Yeah.
No, we got four very generous, but that's what politicians do. Like that quickly, I can divide and conquer, and all of a sudden we've got 4 people that are going to have to pay the piper because it was democratic. And usually what politicians will do is say, oh, democracy is wonderful. Who all wants to be ruled by democracy? And so we all put up our hand and we sign, yeah, we want to be democratic. And then the second question is okay, these 4 individuals are going to pay for it. Everybody in favor. And again, we get that tyranny of the majority. It's just wrong. And those are things that we need to fix in our Constitution so that kind of garbage doesn't go on. It's just disgusting how corrupt and it's just unbelievable. All these political slush funds that they create. Why? So that, oh, if you behave, here's money for your facility here. Oh, here's money for this. I see local taxation where the money stays here. You pay. I mean, the levels of government need to sit down and say, what are their responsibilities? Oh, we have to do sewage, we have to do water, we have to do street. These are the municipal responsibilities. What are the provincial ones? What are the federal ones? And then you add all that up. And if it's like a business, if it costs $1 billion to do what we need to do with education, with healthcare, with the military, with our municipal government, we say, oh gosh, the overall cost is $1 billion. But military, it takes 5%. And you go through it all and you analyze it. And so federal responsibilities is 35 cents on the dollar. Provincial is 25 cents on the dollar. Municipal's 40 cents on the dollar. And then every tax dollar that comes in, it just goes municipal, provincial, federal. There's no more fighting on this idea that, oh, every level of government wants to come and cut the ribbon to the new facility and say, oh, we contributed to that. No, it's not their responsibility. And it's another problem that we need in the Constitution. You actually divide the responsibilities and you divide the tax dollars, and the municipal doesn't need to beg the provincial or the federal government for money, because why? It comes from here. This is where the money starts, and then we pay the other things. Let's turn the system upside down. Let's not send it all to Ottawa and then ask for money back. It's a corrupt system and doesn't work. But hope that answers your question with a few more free bonuses in there.
Paul, you better be careful. This is rural Alberta. These are real cowboys. They have ropes and trees. There might be one option to buy the coffee, but I just wanted to touch on the union question. You mentioned the other night in Medicine Hat, the same question came up, but Paul mentioned the $50 billion that goes to Ottawa. They send back $9 billion. They provide us $21 billion in services, and $20 billion never comes back. So if you implement the plan that Paul has here of, doing everything for ourselves, well, that $50 billion stays here in Alberta. And even though we're running a 15 or $20 billion deficit, the $20 billion that never comes back from Ottawa would cover that. And if you start providing all the services here in Alberta, like one of the other lies that Jason Kenney's group is telling us is we were talking about having our own police force, collecting our own taxes. And if you remember the letter that came out from Mark Milkey, it said fiscal was it fantasies about collecting your own tax? He said what they don't realize is if they collected their own tax, they'd have to hire 5 people. But well, actually, like Premier Kenney, we do realize that. Like we would hire 5,000 people, and they would live in Alberta, and plus we'd fire 10,000 in Ottawa. You know what I mean? So we'd hire 5,000 here. The money would be here. The people would work here. They provide $20 billion in services for us. These mega projects we talk about, they're going to spend $20 billion over 20 years. That $20 billion would be spent, like as you say, some of it would get passed on for federal responsibilities, but a lot of that money would be spent. That $20 billion, we would hire people in Alberta. And when you look at the question about the unions, a lot of those people that you might be scaling down some of the things they're doing, they could be doing a lot of the federal jobs. Like those people from the unions that are working in the public sector could do a lot of the it could be the bureaucracy for the police force, it could be the bureaucracy for our pension plan, it could be the bureaucracy for our thing. So like a lot of that stuff, if we take charge of our own finances, we actually have the money to do that.
I just want to comment because one of the things that Danny and I kind of agree to disagree on, but I think he's seeing the light.
Yeah.
is our public servants, our doctors, our teachers, our nurses, our senior caregivers, that they're paid a wage, as he says, that our cost of providing services is about 25 to 30% more than British Columbia, Ontario, anywhere else. And so you can argue that, well, gosh, we can't pay our teachers $100,000, we need to pay them $70,000. But the beauty of collecting our own taxes, and this tax on a tax is wrong. It's another area that's just so profoundly wrong. Our teachers, they get paid from our taxpayers' money. We pay taxes to the province, and it's only 10%, which you can say, oh, it's nothing like the federal. It isn't. But then that 10% pays our teacher $100,000, and then they say, well, now that teacher needs to pay $30,000 in federal taxes? Absolutely not. You can't tax taxes. And so just our employees, our public servants, just that alone, if the province next month, Jason says, you know what? We are not sending our deductions, our income deductions from all of our provincial employees to Ottawa anymore. We would immediately all of a sudden bring our costs down of all of our provincial employees to a level that we can afford. And so that $100,000 teacher, because they pay taxes back to the province of $30,000, we the taxpayers are the benefit of this. And there's just simple things like that it's time that we just implement and do that. And we don't ask Ottawa for permission. We just do it. What's Ottawa going to do to the provincial government if it stops sending the deductions? If you and I do it, they can come after us and we'll lose our house, our home, our business and everything. What are they going to do to the provincial government for saying, no, we're not sending our taxpayers' taxes a second time to Ottawa? Those are just some things that we absolutely need to do. Premier Kenney needs to quit talking and start walking those steps that actually put us in a position where we can be independent and not dependent on Ottawa. There's one other thing I wanted to comment on that, but anyways, we just need to be collecting our own tax. Oh, I was going to comment on the police force. I don't know if you've noticed, but the RCMP union is actually campaigning now to say that we can't afford a provincial police force. Are you kidding me? And you know what they say? There's $140 million that we get subsidized, and our municipalities are saying that, oh, we can't afford to have our own police force because we get this money from Ottawa. We're going to quit sending $20 billion to Ottawa. Let's see, $20 billion or $140 million for police, $20 billion or 5,000 employees to collect taxes. I mean, like, are you kidding me? Like the numbers are just, there's astronomical. And again, we just hear this idea that this transfer of 140 million, but not only that, it's kind of called full scope of practice. Why do we pay a doctor, let's even say a brain surgeon, we would never pay him to go and to do a throat swab or to check our temperature to see if we got COVID going in the front door. The RCMP are trained to a much higher level, but you go ask those RCMP officers how much of their time is spent on high-level crime and doing those type of things. Huge percentage of their time is just, what would I want to say, giving fines and tickets and you're speeding. And, I've been to 2 or 3 restaurants that were opening up against COVID, and who shows up? The RCMP and the health person. Like, no, I'm sorry, we don't need 140,000 well-trained individual to be going around putting out fines and things like that. And so a lot of our police force doesn't need to be trained to that level for rural protection. And we can actually drop the wage and get a better and more policemen serving our area at a much better cost than what we pay to the RCMP. And I don't know, if you had a new RCMP building built up in this area, but the money that they spend is just unbelievable. They just built a new one down in Coaldale, and I can't remember, I think it was $500 million. It's the fanciest building in town. Like, why would we do that for a police station? The rock they brought in from Manitoba. I mean, it's just like, are you kidding me? That this is to be a police station. Yes, we want a nice one, but it doesn't need to be the Taj Mahal. It doesn't need to be the fanciest building. Anyways, but everything's just, it's just so misguided and so upsetting when you look at these things. We can and we need to do better. But I think I should say thank you very much. I'll stick around for one-on-ones.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for coming, Paul.
Actually, there's one more thing I want
Go
to
ahead.
say. I keep thinking I'm going to say this, but you know, there's a lot of people that say it can't be done. This can't be done, that can't be done. Albertans are famous for doing what can't be done. And my comment to each and every one of us is that we can do this, but don't vote and try to hire someone who says it can't be done. It can be done. I'll do it. And you can count on me. If I'm your leader, we will do these things, and we won't be asking for permission to do it. We will go forward, we'll do it, and we'll just shrug our shoulders and say, you know what?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you to all 5 people who showed up. There's books on the back table for anyone who wants one, and pamphlets. There's also T-shirts being sold back there, and if you need a membership, they're also at the back table as well. And thank you for coming.